Hi everyone, and by everyone I mean my 3 subscribers, the Mom Cools, Nalitana and Naledi, and my little brother C Nonelelwe or Maverick Blaze or Maverick Blaze or whatever that child calls himself these days. So welcome to On Our Spectrum, our very first video. So quickly, what On Our Spectrum is about, it's really about our journey, mostly my experience with being a mother to a neurodivergent child, our day-to-day runnings, our challenges, what we're getting right, what support structures are there, and what our community looks like in terms of autism and just navigating our life as a whole. I need to clarify off the jump that as much as the episode is about on our experience, YouTubing is hard, as much as the channel is on our experience with autism and my son, we really have a responsibility to protect him to some degree. So as much as you'll be hearing and seeing my experience with autism, we are going to try to keep to a minimum how much he's exposed to the channel, because he's not at the age now where he can consent to say, I'd like to be part of the channel. No, I don't want to be part of the channel. So we do have to do right a bit by him. So I've been thinking a lot about starting this channel and about where I would start if I did start with the channel. So for today I'm going to discuss how we went about getting a diagnosis. I thought, to be fair, I would include the costs that came with that as well, and I'll discuss other alternatives that are there for maybe other parents and things they can consider, if I can put it like that. So what is autism? So Autism South Africa, and that's it's a very good website if you're looking for resources on autism. So they define autism as a complex group of neurodevelopmental disabilities. It is considered a spectrum as each person has different strengths, abilities, and requires different types and levels of support. Neurodevelopmental means that the brain and the nervous system are affected. In autism, this can be both positive and negative features. Autism people experience the world differently, and I think that's how I explain it mostly to maybe other kids who are in my son's life, is that my son really experiences the world a bit differently to how we experience it. So how did we go about getting a diagnosis? So when my son was born, maybe a good place to start, there was nothing that seemed out of place. He reached his milestones on time. He was on track, if I can call it that, with his peers in terms of walking, crawling, sitting, eating, and even speech itself. He was really on track with that. With the speech, it then, after he turned 2, or right before he turned 2, the speech then started to go away. So there were a few things that he could say, but then we started to see a decline in those things gradually. Obviously, there were family members who were concerned. I think a bit we were concerned as well, and I'll speak for myself. But we had the comfort that kids grow up differently. They don't grow up at the same pace. But then there were other things. So in terms of social skills, we started to notice that he was really struggling with that as well after he turned 2. We then decided to go see his pediatrician, who's based in Kimberley, which is like 200 kilometers away from where we are. I think when we went, because I'd had experience through friends and their children with autism already, and we'd Googled a number of things, we sort of had the idea that it could have been autism. I don't know why recording this is making me nervous, but I don't usually sound like this. It could have been autism. When we got to Dr. Piens, who's the pediatrician in Kimberley, there were a number of questions. So how is he doing in terms of this? How does he play with friends? Does he play with them? Does he have a problem if there's friends playing around them, or does he not want friends around him as well? How would you quantify the number of words that he has in his vocabulary? And you can just and you can just imagine how much thought you have to give into that when somebody asks you how would you quantify in a number your child's vocabulary. After that assessment, which took about 20 to 30 minutes, the pediatrician then said it does definitely look like autism, but he's not in a position to give a final diagnosis. He would then refer us to Dr. Griesel. I must remember what Dr. Griesel is. Dr. Griesel is based in Bloemfontein. He's, I'm going to get the term right, but I think he's a neurodevelopmental specialist pediatrician something, but he's a doctor. I'll get the term right. We were then referred to Dr. Griesel. The pediatrician also referred us to a speech therapist because from his observation and assessment, Liano's speech was a bit not where it was supposed to be. Getting to the neurodevelopmental specialist pediatrician, I'm going to get that, Dr. Griesel, was a bit of a challenge for us. I think you can imagine when, you need to get to something to get answers. You'd like to do it as soon as possible. But I've since learned that getting to these specialists, there is a bit of a waiting list because there's only so many of them in the country. So we had to wait for about 3 months before we could get an appointment. We did eventually get an appointment and we went to Dr. Griesel in Bloemfontein. The consultation, if I remember that correctly, and this was in 2021, I think this was also during COVID, was 3,000 rands. I think we could then claim it from the medical aid after we had paid it cash out of pocket. Dr. Griesel also did an assessment. I remember we filled in a form, family history. Does anybody in the family have history of 1, 2, 3? We had to describe our upbringings. We had to describe our level of education, which at the time I didn't understand what it had to do with us getting a diagnosis. But I've now learned that I think it was for the doctor to be able to ascertain to which level he gives us information or what our understanding would be, because that question has come up also when we've seen other specialists. I think it was, let me fix this, it was to know how to deliver the information or the diagnosis to us in a way that we would understand and it would resonate with us. So we filled in a form, similarly to the pediatrician, number of vocabulary, does Liano do this around other kids? How does he deal in a situation where there's noise? How does he deal in a situation where there's this? I know there is an official term. I know there's an official term for that form. I'll write it down on the video when I do eventually edit the video. So yes, it was confirmed that it is autism. We were given resources in terms of what is autism, where we can get support, what books we can read, and so forth. From Dr. Griesel, we then started seeing a speech therapist. The speech therapist, and it feels like, I need to say this, it feels like you want to do everything. You want to do everything now, but it does also feel like you're not doing enough. It feels like you could be doing more. When we came back, we then started seeing a speech therapist. The speech therapist wanted to ascertain that Liano's problems with speech were not because of a hearing issue. So I knew we did a hearing. Please don't tear pages from my books. Thank you. We did a hearing test. I can't remember how much that cost, but I know it was less than 1,000 rands. We then started seeing a speech therapist on a weekly basis. The sessions now cost us about 350 rands per session, which is like a 30-minute, and sometimes it will be a 45-minute session. The speech therapist then referred us to an occupational therapist who deals mostly with kids who have sensory integration needs. So we were simultaneously seeing a speech therapist as well as an occupational therapist. So the speech therapist dealing with Liana's needs in terms of speech, and the occupational therapist dealing with Liana's needs in terms of sensory integration. I hope I'm saying this right. I need to say, as much as I thought the speech therapist was going to start doing things and Liana would start talking, it doesn't quite work like that. The speech therapist has really been great in helping us learn how to communicate with our son in verbal terms and in non-verbal terms, and I'll explain that perhaps in another video in a bit more detail. So we're seeing a speech therapist. We're now at a point where we're seeing an occupational therapist once a week. I think the total cost of both these specialists in a month for us ranges to somewhere between 2,000 rands and 3,000 rands, depending on if we have all 4 sessions with the speech therapist, all 4 sessions with the occupational therapist. It could be less, depending, it varies on the child's needs and the parents' affordability, I think, as well as the parents' time as well. I know there was a time when we were doing one session every 2 weeks. So yes, that then became our norm. A year after we had the diagnosis, we went back to Dr. Griesel, and I think this session then cost us 1,000 rand. It's a once-off session. We were still not where we were in terms of development with speech. Not that it would be at the same pace as that of a neurotypical child, but we're still not moving at at the pace we'd hoped we'd move at. So Dr. Chrysel then prescribed medication called Respital for us, which was intended to help Liano cope, what's the word that I'm looking for? Be regulated. And Liano is on the camera. So yes, we are now we're continuing with speech therapy. We continuing with occupational therapy, because I don't think there's a quick fix. I think this is going to be part of our lives for a very long time, if not entirely all our lives. But yes, that's how we went about getting a diagnosis. We went about it, through the private route, if I can call it that. But I'd be interested, if anybody went through it through the public sector, to get a diagnosis, about how that worked, what the timelines were like, and how the intervention programs after getting a diagnosis were like. That's something I'd really be interested in finding out. So we're continuing. I think I'm saying this again. We're continuing with speech therapy. We're continuing with occupational therapy. But the intention with this video, the intention with this channel, is to really raise awareness on autism, especially because I think I'm going to be posting it on Autism Awareness Day, which is going to be on April the 2nd. Going about our day-to-day business in public, I do realize, and sometimes people mean no harm, but I do realize there's still a lot of stigma. There's still a lot of what people don't know, people don't do, and there's definitely need for awareness in our communities. What must I give you? There's definitely need for awareness in our communities. So if you went through, you got a diagnosis a different way than how I've just narrated how we got it, I'd really love to hear from you. If you've got questions, I'm not a subject matter specialist. But this has really been on our experience as a family. It's a spectrum. Everybody's experience is going to be different. What may work for us may not necessarily work for you, and we all need to appreciate that. If there's anything in particular you'd like me to talk about, I'd love to hear that. But I think that's my plan now, to raise awareness on really the basic things, how we navigate, one day at a time. And if you're still watching, thank you for tuning in. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'm waiting to say this. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time.